From the Diary of Bill Lowy, General Comments After 1 Month. The equipment used over here by the American advisors and support personnel does not seem to be obsolete World War II surplus as charged. MAG people live as comfortable as could be expected under the circumstances. Mail and moves are brought into all outposts as often as possible. Weapons are very easy to get, as is ammo. In fact, there is a pretty good choice. Vehicles are practically useless over here, but jeeps and 3/4-ton trucks are found throughout the Delta area in abundance. Aviation personnel have the latest type of helicopters and fixed wings, including HU-1B helicopters and Mohawk and Caribou lifted wings. The Air Force does have some outdated fighter planes, but they seem to me to be ideally suited for this area in that they will carry a heavy combat load and there is no real need for jet speed or ability. During my first month, I heard no complaints on the equipment. Some of the complaints that I have heard include lack of interest or initiative by the ARVN leaders, a flaw or breakdown, or better, a lack of cooperation between advisors and support personnel. This is a complaint voiced by a couple of advisors I've talked to, but not something I've seen personally. Troop lifts over here are supposed to be the most hazardous duty we can have and is logged in record books as combat assault time. Yesterday the company had a big troop lift. One ship was indeed hit by 2 rounds in the cockpit. No one was hurt. The thing that makes this unusual is that the ship was hit not by the Viet Cong, but by a gunner and another ship who got just a little bit carried away. There is one detail about this area that I think deserves mention. In the town of Vinh Long, which is 2 kilometers from here, there lives a man who is known to all of us as Chou. He runs a house of prostitution in the town. He runs labor gangs, which were used to build our compound. He is well known out here and is, in fact, an honorary member of the Officers Club. He's also a twice convicted communist and will gladly sell you piastres, the local currency, at twice the legal rate. This is a common practice among... And then the page runs out. This entry dives into a broader reflection of Poppy's service after his first month in Vietnam. He offers a unique insider's perspective on how the U.S. military's resources and operations were functioning in the early stages of the conflict. Some of the criticisms levied against the war early on focused on equipment, particularly that it was outdated or ineffective. There were also some claims that American advisors were being sent to Vietnam with World War II-era surplus, but Poppy contradicts these, pointing out that the equipment was up-to-date, well-suited for the environment, and largely effective. For instance, aviation personnel like him had access to some of the latest helicopters and aircraft, which were ideal for the kind of terrain they faced in the Mekong Delta. Most of the complaints were by those on the ground, as he notes, which were not so much about what they had, but more about how things were run. Specifically, he mentions that some of the advisors he spoke with were frustrated by the lack of cooperation between ARVN leaders and American personnel. This wasn't something he personally witnessed, but it's telling that even in the early stages of U.S. involvement, tension and breakdowns in coordination were apparent. These would go on to become much bigger issues as the war progressed. Interestingly, Poppy also touches on the risks of troop lift missions, where he transported soldiers by helicopter into combat zones. Though the pilots flying these missions were still officially advisors, these were officially logged as combat assault time, because they were considered some of the most dangerous duties. These operations were so tense, as we see, that some people on his side even got carried away with what they were doing and fired upon their own people. I'm most interested in the story of Chou, who wasn't just an infamous local businessman in the town of Vinh Long, but also a man with connections to all sides of the conflict. He ran a brothel and also managed labor gangs who worked on American infrastructure. Chou was a twice-convicted communist and openly engaged in black market activities. This blurred line between ally and enemy reflects some key characteristics of the Vietnam War: the murky alliances, double dealings, and local actors who navigated the chaos for survival and profit. We see that friend, foe, or neither, there are people who find ways to profit off situations like these, even if they don't have much power associated with traditional institutions like government or religion. The men who built the buildings, what did they know about the architecture? Did they understand where the weak points were? Did they know where there were cracks in the walls of the airbase? Could they tell the VC where the Americans stored their ammunition? What connections did they have to the enemy, whether it be indirectly by Chou or through their direct affiliation with the very forces Poppy was sent over to fight? The same questions could be asked about the prostitutes. They certainly brought levels of entertainment and relief to the American and ARVN forces, But what else were they doing when they were interacting with the Americans? How well did they speak English? Is it possible they weren't just prostitutes? What was said between young soldiers and these women? Poppy experienced plenty that would have made great war stories in the little time he was over there. What did these guys brag about? What would be taken to the VC to be used against the Americans? My general comments after almost 1 month are perhaps quite limited. So far, we've seen the contradictions my grandfather and many like him had to deal with. It wasn't just about fighting an enemy. It was about existing in a complex, unpredictable world where everything was far more ambiguous than it seemed. In just a month, he participated in troop lifts, psychological operations, officer transport, as well as search and rescue missions. He had been shot at, he hadn't been shot at, though he thought he would be, and he hadn't done much shooting himself. The whole time he was away from his big family. How did he reconcile that pain of separation with the grief of the terror campaigns, psyops, and risk of espionage he faced day to day? The photo I chose for today depicts a group of women standing at the edge of the tarmac on an airbase. There is a man to the right. Could he be Chou? Are these his girls? What does this photo say about the relationship between the soldiers in Vietnam and the people in the community around their base? I'm Alex Lowy, and I hope you have enjoyed listening to this episode of Dearest Susie, and receiving messages from the past that my Poppy wrote exactly 60 years ago. I sincerely appreciate your time and interest. Please consider following the podcast on your preferred platform, and if you're enjoying it, I kindly ask that you take the time to rate the show and leave a review. Also, please follow the project on YouTube, X, and Instagram. All likes, comments, shares, and reviews will help grow the reach of this story. The links for these things should be in the description of this episode. Please feel free to email me at dearestsusiepodcast@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to say. I'd love to chat or to hear about your stories as well. Thank you for listening, and God bless.